Welcome to the Boma, Poland studio. My name is Ralph Talmont, and our theme in this series of programs is innovation, entrepreneurship, and breakthroughs. If the ultimate aim for a good society is for all people to be living decent lives with ability to contribute to the well-being and meaningful development for all, then clearly more than a few things need to change. We were proceeding apace towards a world which does not provide any of those things, and now the COVID-19 crisis has hit a big pause button, perhaps for long enough to give us a chance to rethink our direction. Some are calling it the reset button, but I think it's way too early to tell. The benefit of that pause button being hit is that we have time to realize we are in uncharted territory. Nobody has been here before. There is no map. And any sketches of such a map can only be drawn by people collaborating across time zones and across industries, because everyone in every industry is now exploring. And if we learn from each other, we have a chance to build the future we actually want. To do that, we need to redefine the meaning of innovation, from contributing to a relentless headlong rush towards bigger, brighter, faster, more, to a more intentional, considered, dare I say, intelligent progress towards a desirable future. Sustainable innovation, if you will. To help us draw some of those new definitions, today we are talking to someone uniquely positioned to make such suggestions. Right now, Tom Raftery is a futurist and innovation evangelist as a global VP for the software giant SAP, but in previous lives he has worked across technology and sustainability in many different roles. Tom, welcome to our little wireless program.
Thank you, Ralph. Thanks for inviting me on the show.
From your vantage point, if you will, as an innovation evangelist for a major software company that touches all industries, what have you seen as the most positive vectors of change in how industries define innovation? What examples of the three at work make you most hopeful?
I don't know. We're, as you rightly said, we're in the middle of a global pandemic. It is, and I hesitate to use the word unprecedented because the word unprecedented has been used an unprecedented number of times in the last number of weeks and months. We're in a place that the world has never been before. There is no, there's no rule book, there's no guidebook. People are lost very much in many ways. And it's not going to get any better anytime soon. We're looking at 12, 18, maybe 24 months before things get back to any kind of semblance of the way they were before, if they ever get back there fully. I was talking to someone recently about things like Uber and, Airbnb and things like that. And, that industry has been devastated because, would you get into somebody's car now not knowing who'd been there before you? Or would you go to someone's Airbnb not knowing who had been there before you and how well it had been disinfected, and things like that. And even after vaccines become available, still, I think people would be hesitant. A lot of the work I was doing up until this was I was doing a lot of keynotes globally, which involved a lot of travel and in-person events, and that industry is devastated, both the travel and the in-person events. Those are not happening now and won't happen for a long time, again, because of the requirement for physical distancing and because of people's nervousness, I suspect, for the next 18, 24 months about going to in-person events, unless they've been vaccinated, and even then. So technological solutions, we're talking to each other on Zoom right now, and there are similar products. Microsoft Teams has another one, Google has another one. These kind of things are short-term solutions, but may turn into more longer-term solutions. I don't know. On the other hand, as human beings, we crave intimacy is probably too strong a way of putting it, but we like physical interaction, the face-to-face meetings. I mean, we went into lockdown here on March 14th, and on Saturday, 2 days ago, so that was the 23rd of May, we had my brother-in-law and his wife come to visit us for the afternoon, for lunch and for the afternoon. And this was the first visitors we'd had in our home since the 14th of March. And he's a doctor and she's high risk. So we know that they have been extremely careful over the last couple of months. And that's because I've two kids who are high risk. So that's how I felt safe and secure in inviting them to come to our house 2.5 months after the lockdown was put in place here in Spain. And, you know, a week or 2 weeks now after Seville had allowed us to invite people into our home, we still waited 2 weeks, and the people we invited were people who, you know, we were very, very trusting of. So there's a huge nervousness globally, there's a huge anxiety globally, and I think this is also, to your point, a huge opportunity for technical solutions to step up and help out. They'll never get us to the full physical interaction, the full kind of intimacy we get from going to in-person events that we did in the past, but, you know, they'll bring us some of the way there anyway. I don't know. Am I answering your question?
Well, it is a process, isn't it? I mean, as you said, probably the most common phrase that, and the most honest phrase that we can actually utter these days is, I don't know.
Yeah.
And this is not a phrase that people in business utter or like to utter particularly often, if at all.
I've no problem saying it.
Yes, you're an exception. In a way, it's somewhat refreshing if under terrible circumstances that we are getting back to this sort of level of honesty of I don't know honesty, and that I guess is one of the underlying factors for this need to redefine innovation, just the nature of innovation, because all of a sudden it's gone from building products and services that are somewhat improved or displace other products and services. This is famed disruption that we love to talk about so much. We've now been subject to the ultimate kind of disruption, which has redrawn the landscape on which we stand. And it's a process of discovery, I think, that business is only now just beginning to realize that it has to go through. Mm-hmm. The biggest entrepreneurial opportunities, I suspect, always have lain where there were the biggest problems. And now it's been demonstrated to us plainly that we have a lot more opportunities for growth and entrepreneurial activity than we may have suspected. One of the areas that you are particularly involved in deeply is the Internet of Things. And again, from a sort of a mixed perspective of software, hardware, and sociology. Are you seeing any particularly interesting developments or trends, at least? I mean, it is still early days, mm-hmm. in that field, in terms of healthcare, in terms of mobility, any other solutions?
Yeah, absolutely. And if we just think for a second about the whole idea of contact tracing, that's an IoT play right there. That's using Bluetooth technology in phones. Are you familiar with the concept of contact tracing? Should I?
I think we are all becoming very familiar with the concept of contact tracing, not least the controversial nature of centralized systems versus decentralized systems.
Correct. Yeah. I'd be more in favor of decentralized personally, but contact tracing is an obvious one there for IoT technical solution, or not solution, but at least a way of helping us figure out who has been in contact with and who should be self-isolating, that kind of thing. But also, if we think in terms of manufacturing, a lot of manufacturing lines up until now have been designed for employees to be in close physical proximity. And that's not something that can continue because we need to maintain physical distancing. And that is something that will, have to be in place for the forthcoming, 12, 18 months, whatever it is, until the vaccine is rolled out. So if your manufacturing line has been set up to have people in close physical proximity and you can no longer have them in close physical proximity, you've got a big problem. You either reduce your output and have people further apart, or you shut down your lines, which is, the worst possible option. So you don't want to shut down your lines. Then you have people further apart. And if you have people further apart, you're reducing your output. Or if you have space, open up new lines. But very few manufacturing facilities would have space that they could convert to opening new lines, and then they'd have to buy the equipment and set up the new lines. So that's expensive and not a quick solution. Or you put on extra shifts if you haven't maximized that option. Maybe that's something you can do to, get over the fact that you've reduced output because you have people further apart. Or you increase automation. And in combination with that, you need to have, again, some kind of EHS, so environmental health and safety solution in place that's monitoring your employees to make sure that A, they're not coming within 1.5 to 2 meters of each other, or if they are alerting them and also logging that contact. So if further down the line, one of them proves positive, you can then go back and say who this person has come in close contact with and make sure that they isolate so that you don't get a contagion spreading within your manufacturing facility. And you need also, I suspect in many cases, you need also to have a solution like this in place before you're allowed to reopen, just from an insurance perspective. I suspect many manufacturers will have a difficult time reopening if they can't prove that they can do something like this. The ones who didn't close will have to put a solution like this in place to continue operating, and the ones who are closed will need a solution like this to reopen.
What sort of an organization would you need to have to be able to react this quickly, this swiftly to the changing needs of manufacturers, the needs that you've just described?
Okay.
And what sort of companies are actually able to deal with this sort of challenge?
The short answer is it depends.
It usually is.
So I've been talking to a number of people in the manufacturing industry in the last number of weeks and months, obviously, about this kind of stuff. And one woman I was talking to, a woman called Isabelle Leclerc, is head of supply chain for a company called Cascades. They're a large paper company based in Canada. They work exclusively on recycled paper, and they make, for example, toilet paper is one of their big products. So they've had a huge impact of the coronavirus outbreak, but they're not impacted in their manufacturing facilities by physical distancing, but they are in their recycling plants. So a lot of these, that's why I said it depends. If you think of airlines, the impact on airlines has been devastating for the passenger airline industry, but for the cargo industry, it's the opposite, because there aren't enough ships, there aren't enough to get PPE from Southeast Asia, possibly to Europe or the US. There aren't enough planes, and PPE is often paper or plastic, light transparent plastic, so very bulky for its weight. So it requires a lot of cargo space, so that's why I say it depends. Everything has been impacted in different ways, and to be able to respond to it, I guess, to get to your actual question, to be able to respond to it in any way, you need a supply chain which is digital. You need to have transparency down through the supply chain. You need to see where the problems are happening, when they're happening. You need to be able to have solutions in place which allow you to do scenario planning. So you can see, okay, well, if this happens, I have this in place just in case. And if the other happens, then I can take this option, So you do all those kind of scenario plays. But for that, you need to have proper, business planning tools in place to allow you to do that. And you need the visibility down your supply chain, which is only given by having digitized your supply chain. And which then allows you to have agility, and resilience. But not everyone has that. The customers we have, and I suspect it's not unique to us, but the customers we have who had digitized the most were the ones who saw their supply chains be the most resilient and who could react quickest. I don't want to turn this into an ad for SAP, but we made several of our digital supply chain products free to our customers, cloud-based solutions, so that they wouldn't have to go to data centers, they wouldn't have to stand up servers, so that they could turn it around really quickly. And we made it freely available, and we had a huge uptake on it, which helped our customers stay in business and keep their supply chains going. And it's those kinds of things, not that we're unique in this, other companies did this as well. So I'm not turning it into an ad for SAP. Other companies have done this as well, but allowing customers to very quickly get on board, get cloud solutions in place, have their supply chains more digitized, then that it's things like that that have allowed large organizations and smaller organizations as well to respond and stay going.
This is actually a really good example of the two principles that are all of a sudden not merely nice to have, but a matter of life and death for companies, and that is speed and agility.
Yeah.
And whereas in the not so distant past, innovation was about largely, if we're honest, about incremental improvement. It is now about total disruption and redesign of many systems from the ground up. Yep. And again, this is a hell of a challenge for large companies, although they of course have the capital to pay for such systems. Whereas small companies may not have the capital, but they are leaner and able to move faster.
Correct.
What do you think might
be the whole digital transformation thing is something we've been talking about for a long time, for 4 or 5 years at least now. The whole digital transformation term has been out there, and people have been talking about plans for digital transformations, and maybe the leading ones have done a couple of pilot projects, and maybe even turned one around and turned it into live, gone from proof of concept to live. Maybe this has been the burning platform that has been missing. There's been no forcing factor for digital transformation really up until now. And now there's this huge burning platform there that is absolutely requiring companies to digitize, because it's the only way you can survive something like this.
If to innovate also means to change direction when required by circumstances, do you think the majority of companies will be able to, now that, everybody knows they have to, but do you think the majority of companies will be able to somehow realize that actually far more fundamental changes than digital window dressing are required, and issues such as purpose and the question of why the company exists is actually at stake? Are you seeing examples of people dealing with this sort of challenge successfully?
So nothing as stark as that, I would say, or nothing as pronounced, as in people aren't saying it that way, because to a large extent right now, this is about surviving. This is company survival. This is, if we don't figure out how to get our supply chains under control, if we don't figure out what's going on, we're dead in the water. And we absolutely need to do this. I mentioned we put those free offers out there. You would not believe the uptake. Just unbelievably blew us away, went beyond our wildest expectations. And it's just because this is sink or swim. It really is.
Are people technologically sophisticated enough? Are companies technologically sophisticated enough to be able to actually use such tools?
Yes is the short answer. They don't require that much technological sophistication, because they're cloud delivered, for example. So What is required, yes, is we work with a partner ecosystem. And again, I'm speaking about what we're doing in SAP, but we're not unique. So this is not an ad for SAP by any means again. We have a partner ecosystem in place who works with our customers and helps them implement the solutions. And then the UI, the user interface that people are using on the factory floor or wherever it is generally delivered browser. So it's browser based, works on a phone, works on a tablet, works on a computer. So you can be on the manufacturing floor looking at it through a HTML delivered user interface, or you can stand up your own mobile apps either. So sure, there will be a requirement for user training on factory floors and places like that to get people up to speed, and that's a whole organizational development thing that needs to happen within companies, maybe changing the processes they have, and organizational development is a whole science in itself, and it's not something that you want to shortcut, because people tend to push back against things they feel that are imposed on them. So change management theory would have you work with your employees, obviously, and take their suggestions on board and build those into how you roll out these solutions internally. But that's all about architecting your processes to meet the solutions, or vice versa.
Let's zoom out a little, because it's very easy to get drawn into intricate discussion about the technologies and the solutions, engineering solutions, which are, of course, at the core of innovation. But let's look more broadly, and let's look at a subject that we've discussed a number of times over the years, and that is our general relationship to the reality of climate change,
mm-hmm.
and how that relates to the fundamentals of business. Conventional, outdated economic thinking measures the cost of fighting climate change, and just the cost, and talks mostly about renewable energy. These are the two components of fighting climate change, and this is plainly inadequate. The cost of renewables itself has fallen through the floor, and the opportunities to make money fighting climate change are enormous. Conversely, if we do not, then the losses will be incalculable in money and in human suffering. So we're at a really something of a fulcrum where, if we twist one way, we may have a chance at building capitalism 2.0, if you will, where our systems are redesigned, and our thinking and the context we look at are broader than we have so far. Or we keep pushing to, under the circumstances we are faced with now, to get back to the old normal, which really is a shortcut to disaster. How does all this factor into the job of an entrepreneur? What sort of qualities, what sort of thinking do you think are required for entrepreneurs to really face the challenge that we are all looking at, and say, okay, I'm going to walk down the path of discovering new value because A, it's good for my business, and B, it's good for the planet?
I think there's a bigger question. If you'll pardon
There
me
always
hijacking
is.
it.
Invariably, there is a bigger question.
So yeah, I think entrepreneurs have a big part to play, but I think as well, and even more importantly, I think regulators have a part to play. And we're seeing right now, because we're in the middle of this pandemic, and because there are big stimulus funds about to be drawn down, there's a huge opportunity for the likes of a Green New Deal. And for that to be stimulus funded, because there was a study came out in the last couple of days, maybe last week or two, by, amongst others, a group of researchers, including Joseph Stiglitz and Nicholas Stern, who have said that stimulus spending on new green energy projects creates twice as many jobs per dollar than investments in fossil fuel projects. So obviously, if we are going to, and we are globally, we're all going to be, rolling out these stimulus funds to try and get the economies back together again. Well, obviously, twice as much value per dollar means it would make a huge amount of sense to pour all that money into the likes of renewable energy, electrification of everything. So transportation going fully electric, and then the energy grid becoming getting its energy from renewables. And as you mentioned yourself, renewable energy costs are cratering. The most recent deal I saw was, I think it was in Saudi, but it was for energy at 1.3 cent per kilowatt hour, a solar project. And just for context, for anyone who's unfamiliar, gas in Dubai, it costs 9 cents per kilowatt hour to generate electricity from gas. This is in the neighboring country, and it's 1.3 cents per kilowatt hour, and that is a 30-year power purchase agreement. So that's a set price of 1.3 cents per kilowatt hour for 30 years, which is huge.
And the cost of generation
security
is going to keep coming down and down. So this is truly a license to print money.
Correct, absolutely. We've seen the cost of wind energy fall by over 55% since 2012, and the cost of solar fall by about 90% in that same time. And the cost of energy storage and lithium-ion batteries has fallen 87% in that time. And they're not stopping. That they will continue to fall. So energy storage in grid scale batteries is now becoming a thing. So you can smooth out the dips in renewables. In fact, now the combination of solar plus storage is becoming in Europe competitive with the cost of gas burning. So, I mean, this is a landmark moment in the history of energy. And obviously, if you are well, first of all, the amount of time it takes to build a wind park or a solar park is 0 to 2 years, typically. The amount of time it takes to build gas or coal is 6 years to 8 years, including all the permitting and environmental impact assessment, etc. And the amount of time to build nuclear is 10 plus years. So right there, if you want to build energy generation now, the fastest way to do it is with wind or solar. The cheapest way to do it is with wind and solar. So why would you not choose them? And to your point, they're getting cheaper all the time. And with battery storage becoming cheaper all the time as well, it's a great way of flattening those peaks and troughs that you can get from the variability that comes with renewables. If we look at the Dogger Bank is a place off the east coast of the UK. They are building there the world's largest offshore wind farm right now.
Gigawatts of power.
3.6 gigawatts of power. They're using the GE Heliade X wind turbines, which are 12 megawatt wind turbines. They're the largest wind turbines in the world. So the advantage of using a 12 megawatt wind turbine is typical wind turbines that were out offshore were 1 or 2 megawatts, and more recently they've been 6. So if you put a 12 megawatt wind turbine out there, it's got double the output of a 6, obviously. So it means half the amount of installation and half the amount of maintenance for 12 megawatts of power. So you're reducing your installation costs, you're reducing your maintenance costs, and you're increasing the energy output of your area. You're doubling it if it's going from 6 to 12. So that's huge. The 3.6 gigawatts, as I said, will be built out in 2 years, which is unprecedented in terms of getting 3.6 gigawatts online. And probably the best comparison is the Hinkley C nuclear power plant that they're trying to build in the UK,
and have been for years.
And have been for years, and it's rated at 3.5 gigawatts from 3 reactors, because a nuclear reactor typically puts out about 1 gigawatt. So these two are comparable in terms of their output. But the Hinkley C nuclear plant, they've been trying to get it up and running for years. They're still about 10 years away from it coming online, if it ever comes online. So, right there you see an incredible comparison. Solar and wind, the costs are coming down, and they scale enormously as well in a way that no other generation technology does. So this last weekend, Saturday and Sunday, the 23rd and 24th of May, you had a situation in the UK where it was a bank holiday weekend. Because it was a bank holiday weekend, a lot of businesses were closed. We're in the middle of a lockdown. Lots of people were at home, and because we're in the middle of a lockdown, retail is closed. So, again, not in other words, not a huge amount of demand for electricity. The grid managers or the grid operators were forecasting 3.5 gigawatts, 3.7 gigawatts of excess supply over demand. So what happened? The price of electricity went negative. Mm-hmm. If you had an account with, I think it's Octopus Energy are the ones who do this, they expose that negative pricing to their customers. So people using the Octopus Energy tariff over the weekend were being paid up to 11 pence per kilowatt hour. Now, imagine you own an electric car. I do. I have a Nissan Leaf, 40 kilowatt hour car. So 40 kilowatt hour battery in the car. So there.
That's a battery on wheels.
Yeah, exactly. So right there, I could have been paid, well, I don't live in the UK, so pounds to euro, 11 cent. You're talking, £4.40, which is €5, let's say, which isn't huge, but it's better than paying that €5 to fuel the vehicle. I'm getting paid to fuel the vehicle, and if I turn on my immersion, and if I turn on my pool pump, and if I, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, suddenly your meter's going in reverse almost.
You've just very elegantly described the nature of innovation that we need to really look into, and that is based in system thinking.
Yes.
Where we're not creating a thing for a problem, but we are creating a thing that fits into a system, that fits into larger systems, that together solve a whole lot of problems, not merely one problem at a time. Mm-hmm. We still have a situation where the incumbent energy generation systems are being paid out of our taxes to continue to pollute. Somewhere in the order of $5 trillion per year globally. Just to put that into perspective, $1 million is a brick of $1,000 bills. $1 billion is a pallet of those bricks. $1 trillion is a football pitch of those pallets. And 5 of those are given away from our collective taxes to industries that would not be economically viable without that money. Mm-hmm. $5 trillion would pay for a whole lot of innovation and entrepreneurship were it directed that way. But we know that that's just the way things are. But it is an illustration of how the need for innovation actually doesn't come from, it almost never comes from the incumbent, but it comes from a change in regulation, change in circumstance, or as we've had, as we've seen in the last couple of months, comes in imposed from the outside.
So yeah, I think Ralph, you're right. And one of the important things that I think people should be aware of is the concept of a carbon budget. And this is possibly not widely known. So I'll give a little bit of context. So the idea of a carbon budget is that we decided as a planet in 2015 in the Paris Climate Accord that we wanted to keep global warming at 1.5, or worst case scenario, 2 degrees C above the baseline.
Which it doesn't sound like a lot, but it is actually dramatic.
Yeah, and we're actually over 1 degree already. So, you know, we have less than a degree to go. But to get from where we are today to that 2 degree maximum, we know how much, because it's basic physics and mathematics, we know how much CO2 we have to inject into the atmosphere to get to that 2 degrees C mark. And it's roughly about 1,000 gigatons of CO2. Now, we are injecting 50 gigatons CO2 into the atmosphere roughly every year. So you're looking at a 20-year window.
So the arithmetic is fairly simple.
It's fairly simple. The huge issue we have is that although it's about 1,000 gigatons, the proven reserves of the fossil fuel companies and countries are the likes of Saudi and Venezuela, where they're state-owned, and companies are like the Exxons and BPs and Shells, etc. So the proven reserves of these organizations total in excess of 3,000 gigatons. The proven reserves are what these companies' value is based on. It's based on the fact that they have these proven reserves that they will exploit, and that's their worth. That's what their shares are worth. That's what their market capitalization is based on. That's what their loans are based on. If they can't exploit them, they're dead in the water. If they do exploit them, we're dead and there's no water. You know, so they have to write off 2/3 of their value, or we're dead. If they write off 2/3 of their value, they're dead. So
no CEO ever has willingly written off 2/3 of the value of the company
correct.
he or she was in charge of.
We're talking trillions of dollars. It was estimated to be about $21 trillion worth of value that has to be left in the ground. So, you know, that's huge. That's why the fossil fuel companies are fighting this tooth and nail, because it is a fight to the death for them. That's why we've seen the oil wars we have. The Saudis are gutting the price of oil because they want to make sure that every gigaton, or as many gigatons in the atmosphere as possible, are Saudi gigatons. So they can undercut everyone else and put the others out of business, and they can make sure that, you know, as many of those gigatons are Saudi gigatons as possible. So there's that. There was something else I was going to say, and again, that's gone out of my head.
So we'll mark that too.
Mark that spot as well. So it's a huge challenge, obviously. In terms of sequestration, which is something we are going to have to do along with stopping putting the carbon up there, because we're now at about 420 parts per million CO2 in the atmosphere.
Just top that, yeah.
Yeah, where, you know, for thousands of years it was 250. So ideally, we should get it back down to 250. CO2 stays in the atmosphere for about 2,000 years unless we get it back out somehow. Now, stop for a second, think about this challenge. A gigaton is 1 billion tons. Yeah. So think of a Mini Cooper car. It's a little over a ton. So it's, you know, that's roughly what a ton looks like. A small car. Think of 1 billion cars. That's 1 gigaton. We need to get, you know, we're pumping 50 gigatons into the atmosphere every year. We need to be pulling more than that back out of the atmosphere every year and sequestering it somewhere. Now, the carbon sequestration technologies that exist today are negligible. And it's not a profitable area to work on right now. So there's not a lot of work going on there, or the work that's going on there isn't getting very far.
Is it a question of investment, or simply entrepreneurs are looking elsewhere because it's easier, or both?
Probably both, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
The best carbon sequestration technology that exists is a tree.
Mm-hmm.
There is nothing, there is no carbon sequestration technology that beats a tree. None that has been man-made yet. I'm not saying there won't be, but right now there's nothing better than a tree. So what we should be doing is we should be taking back land that has been stolen from biodiversity and forestation for agriculture, giving it back to forestry and increasing biodiversity, and then getting our food from the likes of large indoor vertical farms and from clean meat. So clean meat is meat that's made from plant protein as opposed to slaughtering animals. So we have large indoor vertical farms for producing plant food, and then use some of that to produce the clean meat. And I don't know if any of your listeners tried some of the clean meats that are out there. I had a Beyond Meat burger recently, and it was really nice. It was, indistinguishable to me from a beef burger. Now, I haven't eaten beef in years, so maybe my palate isn't the best one to be choosing, but there are plenty of chefs out there who have been convinced by this. And if you go onto YouTube, for example, you'll see lots of people doing blind taste tests of Impossible Burgers and Beyond Meats and the other companies that are in this space. And that's an area that's actually exploding with entrepreneurship and investment. Beyond Meat, when they went public, I think I'm getting this right, they went public at a share price of about $25, it would have been, and they're now at over 100, and they're getting huge investment, and the same with Impossible Foods. Those are the two that I know best, but so there are others in this space.
This goes back to the idea that the biggest opportunities exist in the areas where there are the biggest problems.
Correct.
And if you engage with those problems as an entrepreneur, then you actually have a really large field to play in. Food, what we eat, how it's produced, how it's packaged, how it's delivered to us, is responsible for, depending on how you count it, but somewhere in the order of a quarter of our total greenhouse gas emissions.
Yeah.
There isn't a bigger playing field out there. Yet beyond those, Impossible Meats and such projects that have actually been getting a lot of publicity over the last year and a half, there is not a lot of visible activity. And you just said that you had seen some. Please share.
Well, those are the two main ones that I've seen, but there are other companies as well. If you look at some of the big companies like Cargill and those who traditionally have gotten their meat, because they're some of the big meat producers in the US. They've traditionally gotten their meat from farmers, from slaughter of animals. They've changed what they define themselves as. They now define themselves not as meat producers, but as protein producers. And they are investing in the likes of the Impossible Foods and the Beyond Meats because they know they have to, because they see which way the market is going, and they see that the current mechanism is unsustainable. We have now 7.5 billion people on the planet. We have a rising middle class in Southeast Asia and South America and Africa who are all going to want to have meat, who won't necessarily care its origin as long as it's healthy and safe.
And tastes good.
And tastes good, correct. And nutritious and delicious, as they say.
Yes, but this is on the plane of generational shifts. And we don't necessarily have a generation. And one of the issues that keep cropping up again and again, as soon as you start to discuss sustainable innovation, is how we educate our kids and what tools we give them to actually deal with
I
all
disagree,
this.
Ralph.
Yeah.
I disagree. And the reason I disagree is because of this.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you talk about a generational shift. Think of the generational shift of, my kids. I've two boys, 14 and 17. And when they were born, those phones didn't exist. And now they each have one. And they know how to use them better than me, and I'm a technologist.
Mm-hmm.
That's a generational shift that's happened in less than 10 years. And it
So
can,
this is
with their generation.
twice the speed you would have expected. This is actually a riff on a conversation I had a couple of weeks ago with Ape Pojavirta, who actually founded a mobile learning company, and he said that he was most hopeful about the whole field of education and education being a pull activity versus a push activity going forward. This is definitely what is required. Yet, when Italy declares that it's going to put climate science on the curriculum of its schools, it is big news. Of course, it's big news because it's not done anywhere else. But it shouldn't be big news. It should be normal.
Yeah.
We don't have a lot of time for this to become normal.
True. No, we don't. But big shifts like that can happen very quickly. Like I said, the smartphone is one example. If I think of the current situation we're in, virtually overnight, all schools here in Spain shifted to teaching online, and in most other countries too. Now, it happened in my kids' school very quickly because for years, they've already been teaching their kids using iPads. So most of the teachers' content was already digital. So the school issued kids with an iPad, not books. They had no school books. It was all done on iPads. So literally the lockdown came on Friday the 13th for the schools. Schools were shut on Friday the 13th. And Monday morning, school started up online through Zoom.
Just like that.
They already had an infrastructure in place using Google Classroom for, submitting assignments and things like that. So the teachers just said, okay, check out Google Classroom on Monday morning. I'll give you details on how to connect within Google Classroom. And sure enough, when they got to Google Classroom Monday morning, the Zoom details were there. They hit on Zoom, opened up, open your iPad's application X to whatever subject Y, and so on.
Mm-hmm. We need to be wrapping up, unfortunately. This is a conversation that I've been looking forward to for quite some time.
Good.
But you actually touched on a subject which is key to innovation thinking. It is a fundamental quality without which innovation has a really hard time coming into being, and that is the idea of diversity. You're an immigrant. You're Irish. You live in Spain.
Mm-hmm.
You're at the forefront of international collaboration, international cooperation. You have traveled all over the place.
Yep.
Care to comment on how diversity might or might not develop under these conditions of tightened security and restrictions and limited personal contact?
Yeah, that's not one I've given much thought to, but maybe I should. And it's a good point, well made. Until there is a vaccine, as we've touched on several times, travel is going to be significantly impacted. People's attitudes to foreigners are going to be impacted by this as well, at least short term. You will be nervous of someone who's not from your neighborhood. Possibly, you don't know if there's a spike in infections in Madrid. Do we want the Madrileños coming to Seville for the weekend? Absolutely not. That kind of thinking. But I think although that'll be in people's psyche for years and decades to come, I think that will slowly drift away again. And diversity and inclusion is massively important for businesses, because we have been in a globalized society in the last number of decades, and increasingly so. As you rightly mentioned, I'm an immigrant. I'm Irish, living in the south of Spain. And we've seen that I work for a global organization. We have, I think we have offices in like 150 countries or something ridiculous like that. But our customers are also incredibly diverse. And if we are not reflecting their diversity in our employees, for example, then they will be less likely to do business with us. It's a very intangible thing, but when you have a culture fit with somebody, you get on better with them, you're more likely to do business with them.
This is just basic, right?
Yeah, exactly. So if you are a diverse organization, reflecting the diversity of your customer base, you are likely to do better. And you're likely to make better decisions because more points of view are being taken into account in the decision-making process. The more points of view you can bring to the table, the better decision will be made at the end of the day, reflecting more points of view. So diversity and inclusion, from my perspective and from SAP's perspective and from most large organizations, let's be honest, is massively important.
We're walking into a landscape. There is no map. We're all in this together, and let's see how this unfolds. Tom Raftery, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, Ralph.
It's been a great pleasure, and as I said, I had actually looked forward to this for quite some time.
Thank you so much.
Let's not wait that long till our next chat. Thank you to our listeners. My name's Ralph Talmont, and thank you to the rest of the team, Filiberto Amati, Mikołaj Wohenczak, Zuzana Lewandowska, and Alexandra Dudek. This has been a Boma Poland studio chat. And if you are viewing it, in fact, this week, the week of the 25th of May, 2020, for the rest of the week, we have a whole bunch of programs coming up, and the schedule is up online at boma.global. Thank you for your attention, and it's goodbye from Warsaw.
Thanks, everyone. Goodbye from Spain.